Australian airline Qantas is set to resume its international flights from July 2021, but has stated that some destinations that have high COVID-19 numbers will need a vaccine rollout before the airline can resume flights to those destinations. Now, to help me unpack the impact of the vaccine rollout on the airline industry is aviation expert Desmond Latham. Desmond, a pleasure to have you on the program. Now, Qantas looks to resume flights to and from South Africa in July, but for South Africans who are hoping to jump on the first flight to visit their friends or family in Australia, delays in the acquisition of COVID-19 vaccines are likely to put the brakes on those travel plans. Just take us through that.
Well, I mean, I think it's a little putting the cart before the horse at the moment, because we're still dealing with COVID infections and also a second variant that's been notified and gone throughout the world as quite infectious. So I think you also got to look at other international airlines and what they're doing at the moment. Germany is shut down its international flights. Its numbers are surging as well. And to look at Qantas itself, I mean, Australia has a bubble. It's got an agreement with New Zealand on some flights between the two nations, but they're not flying in and out of the country. So I think for Qantas CEO to say that they will fly from June the 1st is really optimistic, to put it mildly.
All right, let's speak about prospects here. If people refuse to take the vaccine, does this not isolate them from traveling using this airline?
Yes, it will. I mean, it's very clear. You and I, if I travel a lot in Africa in particular, I make documentaries, for example, and I fly a lot. And if you go to Tanzania and you don't have a yellow fever certificate, they'll turn you around and put you back on the airplane. So I think people who are anti-vaxxers or fighting this must understand that they're not going to be able to travel much in the future unless they have some kind of proof that they don't have they're not carrying this pandemic. We've got used to yellow fever. It's not a big deal. So they better get used to the fact that they're going to need to take a vaccine. But the problem for us is that it's really expensive at the moment, and that the emergency workers are going to be first in line for it. Along with police and so on. So if you're a middle-class person hoping to take a trip to Perth to visit your in-laws, or so to speak, you're going to be waiting a while.
I want us to zoom a bit into Qantas as an airline. I mean, it's become the largest international fleet in the world and is a popular carrier among South Africans. Let's talk about the airline's performance in the South African market prior to this decision to stop flights. How has the company fared against its competitors?
Well, really well. I mean, it's done really well against SAA for a start. It makes a profit, whereas SAA couldn't on those trips to Perth and to Sydney. So, I mean, it's one of the biggest. It's not the biggest, but it's one of the biggest airlines in the world. But even that airline, in a profit situation, took 10 billion Australian dollars from their own government as a bailout, along with Lufthansa and Qantas and Emirates, United and Delta and all the other big airlines of the world. So no one got out of this or has escaped unscathed from the pandemic. They're all suffering. But Qantas itself has done really well. They run a business model that makes profits.
But the airline's dismal performance during the 2019-2020 financial year, which was also compounded by a host of travel restrictions, saw the Australian carrier post a 22 billion rand loss. Now, this was its worst financial result in a century and saw it cut about 6,000 jobs as part of its cost reduction strategy. Just talk us through that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, all airlines are cutting jobs. For example, 10,000 jobs have been cut from United Airlines. About 30,000 workers at Delta are on furlough. In other words, they're working part-time while they're at home. Also, Delta has cut 1,400 pilots alone. SAA has around 380, to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about here. So around the world, in Africa, 80 to 90% of passenger traffic is gone this year. And we're talking about more than 3 million jobs in Africa alone. So this is significant.
But with the COVID-19 vaccine's international arrival, the CEO of Qantas, Alan Joyce, has expressed a hint of optimism regarding the future of its flight plans. What can we expect from this airline in the coming months?
Well, I think he's, I don't want to say smoking his socks necessarily, but I think you must understand that, that around the world, we're dealing with something that's fundamentally we have not seen since 1918, and there was no commercial air transport then. It started in 1922. So this is the first for the sector. And I'm seeing a lot of this from IATA. I attend all of the briefings, and I'm afraid since the beginning of last year, we've been arguing with them about the risk management. They've been talking about the filters in the airplanes being useful, and the government's not working with them, but they don't seem to understand that we're in an existential moment as human beings. We're facing something that is going to kill a lot more people, and no government is going to put an airline on the ground that's going to fly between nations if they're not secure about the health.
All right, and before I let you go, I just want us to give some analysis regarding the local aviation industry. I mean, things seem to be picking up slightly, especially as there's an increase in travel. How are things looking right now? I mean, we are seeing a couple of new players in the domestic flight sector. I mean, with the likes of Flight. How are things going there?
Well, they were going pretty well until the lockdown over Christmas and New Year. So a lot of the airlines were hoping to make up a bit of a difference there. But I fly, as I've said to you, I've flown commercially a lot in the last year, and as an essential worker. And fly Safi, for example, the seats are always full, going to Cape Town and back. So domestic airlines is going to power the future. And I think SADC region, there's going to be an emergence in SADC, some kind of corridor network and an agreement among SADC states where we can fly to, perhaps, if we're lucky, Mauritius or to Zambia, Zimbabwe. Those flights will be reinstated. So I think you've got to look nationally and regionally first. The big flights, the direct flights to Dubai or to New York and so on, I think is going to take some time to come back, at least another 8 months or so. And so the June date that I've been hearing, I don't agree. I don't think it's feasible.
Yeah. So it's been about a week since we got that announcement by the president of lockdown level 3 regulations. Has this in any way affected the local aviation industry?
Yes, it has. I mean, we've had reports that a lot of the flights, for example, Lyft, this new airline that's using like an Uber app-based digital process, they were really affected because one of their main routes was down to George. They're looking at the upper middle class sector, and their tickets are not very cheap. But the point being is that with the southeast coast shutting down, all the beaches shutting down, we've seen the pictures of police moving in recently. But from before Christmas, these beaches shut down. It's had a knock-on effect. A lot of people thought, okay, they're not going to be flying down to George for their normal holiday. So there has been an effect. But domestic airlines are on a much better footing at the moment than the big national airline, SAA. They are making a living, and they are paying their pilots and their ground crew and their cabin crew and so on. So we're looking at a situation where local national airlines will, pretty much like about 60 years ago, if you look at the history of aviation, it's going to maintain.
All right, that was aviation expert Desmond Latham.